communities, especially historically marginalized ones, feel digitalized versus empowered, that leads to mistrust and disengagement rather than engagement. So how do we, the one thing that we were just in closing, the one thing that we talk a lot about in our Disruptor DAO community is not just agency, but what's the framework for agency? What can we do about this? What kind of questions do we want to ask? So if we had an if we could define agency through the lenses of access and governance, education, neural safety, consent, yield, what would that look like? What would that acronym look like? And so for me, it would be access, who gets in and how, like who meaningfully participates? Like these are the questions that I would be asking myself, right? If I'm forming a business now, or we are consulting with folks that are trying to create, our first questions then would be followed by, how do you show your community what does real decision making look like? Who actually influences decisions, right? Do people understand the system? Do they understand, what you represent? Not just your mission, not just your vision, just how you operate, right? Does it reduce anxiety or threat, or does it increase it? Is participation informed? Is it voluntary? And yield, who benefits economically? So these are, when I think of agency, I think of it through those lenses, because the reality is, in closing, technology that scales without agency becomes extraction. But technology that scales with agency, it becomes empowerment. And we have to keep that in mind, because obviously agency and emotions are interconnected. So there's no business, centralized or decentralized, at this stage of the game that should not be considering agency and building agency.
Thank you for that, Dr. Eve. And agency is something that, we don't pay enough attention to. It's not in our day-to-day awareness and in communication, and how we're building out our working processes, right? So even now, like you mentioned, with building out decentralized organizations, or building out your AI agent, right? Or did infrastructures into how we're working together as people. It's still very, very important to have that human-centered, human people energy first and foremost. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And I welcome folks who want to hear a little deeper, because in the last 3 weeks, during our Wellness Wednesday series, which happens every Wednesday at 7:30 live on YouTube, we actually engaged in this very topic. And some of us shared personal stories of what agency looked like for us and why it was stumbled. For some of us, it was intergenerational trauma. Maybe it was workplace trauma, but systemic trauma. But along the way, we found ourselves being silenced and still operating, even though we were very successful. And we talked about how we had to examine that, scan that, and then regulate our own nervous system and engage in behaviors that was going to work in our advantage. So if you want to listen more about that, or, feel free to hit our YouTube channel.
Thank you, Dr. E. Lynn, do you want to jump in here a bit, and what's your vantage point on how these systems are evolving, and what do you believe is most at risk?
I really agree with Dr. Eve, and she brought it out very beautifully in depth. And I don't have much to say about it, but I just have to emphasize on trust, right? A lot of conversation has been done about trust from the previous panelists, from other summits that we've done, but it's still a concern, right? If I don't trust you, I remember someone just echoed something, and they said, if I don't trust you, I am not in a position to buy your products. I am not in a position to engage in your community. I am not in a position to even engage in what we are doing. So my emphasis would be, to every innovator, can you just build a trust with our users? I wouldn't want to call them users, but the people who we have in mind when we are building. And even when we are building, do we have them in mind, or do we have our products in mind? So my emphasis would be, empathy goes along with the trust. If we can bring those two twins together, I think that is what makes a very successful innovation. Over to you, Angel.
I like that, having them in mind and not having our product in mind. I like that a lot. And that brings us to our next question, which is about trust. Trust is becoming the foundation of the digital economy. So, George, would want to hear from you in your field. What does trust by design look like in practice? George and then Matthew, I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this. Oh, George, if I think George may be looking to come
Unmute.
online. Matthew, if you want to take it away, and then George come back.
I think he has to, is he unmuted? He may have to unmute himself.
I saw George maybe was having some technical, yeah, I think his internet may be going out. So when he comes back, we'll definitely hear from George. Matthew, want to hear your take on this piece.
I'll jump in this. I work in the built environment, which is highly fragmented across stakeholders and time. And so mistrust is practically built into the system, which is a huge issue because the built environment and infrastructure is everything around us. So I've been very dedicated to trying to resolve that issue and start to engineer trust. How do we actually design it? How do we embed it into every step of a process, especially in something that is so impactful on the world, on nature, on humans, and our spirits around us, and how we feel about everything. So the approach that we've taken, and this is where blockchain is really opportunistic because it does a really good job of protecting privacy and autonomy while also giving us public presentation and verification at an unprecedented level. The immutability, the different hashes and digital fingerprints that come with that. So we've been inspecting how can we include auditability. So as people make decisions or as they produce items, how do we trace the provenance, where it came from, what changes were made, where it is now? How do we actually inspect that? If we are using AI agents and it produces a decision and maybe we don't agree with that decision, how do we understand the data that it drew from in order to produce some sort of answer, especially if it's impacting us? Then there's the transparency elements as we look at the creator economy or new tokenized ownership models or investment models where things are moving around a lot. Being able to inspect what's happening behind the scenes because it's on a ledger that we are all sharing, I think that's a really big opportunity. And that's not how markets operate. That's not how the built environment operates, or most industries for that matter. You don't get to see what's going on behind the scenes. You just receive something on the other end. And so being able to look inside and understand, here's why I'm getting some sort of outputs or some sort of answer or some sort of return on an investment. Here's what impacted that. And I think that from an investment perspective, if we talk about money and capital markets a little bit, it helps us to understand risks about other people, risks about investments or assets or tokens, instead of trying to assume that. And this goes back to the trust elements. We have to assume that there's something that we will mistrust in other people or different systems. And maybe that comes with hesitation or opportunity costs or lower investment return. So if we can start to understand risks and make informed decisions, I think that's a much better outcome for everyone involved, for people who are creators and producing things because they want to be transparent and honest, and then also for buyers, users, consumers who want to be comfortable with whatever they are putting their hard-earned dollar towards. So yeah, trust by design as opposed to almost mistrust inherent in the system. And it's unfortunate that that's the way it is. It's not by accident, I don't think. A lot of that is because there's arbitrage opportunities. People take advantage of asymmetry. If I know something that you don't and I can capitalize on it, people will. So leveling that playing field again and giving equal opportunity to people, I think is really important. And for once, we can build a system that actually enforces that programmatically and transparently with very few opportunities to escape that. You can't really navigate out of that in blockchain-based systems.
Yeah, for sure. And again, that's what is so inspiring about this space of Web3 and the blockchain specifically, and the premise of Web3, it being an opportunity for us to have ownership, right? And with ownership comes, exactly what you were saying, Matt, in terms of we own it, we're able to participate in the governance structure and setting up these systems, which of course then, mitigates a bit of risk because we're part of the conversation, right? So, and from that vantage point, Kara, would love for you and Paula to jump in here. As we are, these emerging technologies are changing, who gets to participate in ownership, opportunity, and decision making? How does trust factor into all of this? And I know with having this space of decentralization in Web3, owning data ownership is a thing. So, we'd love to get y'all's vantage point on this, Kara and then Paula.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kara. Thanks so much for having me and the Disruptor DAO ladies. This is just, a topic that's very important to me and something that I hope that we're bringing within our organization into real world application. And I like these conversations that seem to come in connection with Disruptor DAO too, that have this human element. So thanks for bringing this important topic up. So maybe I can add some perspective or insight in terms of some activities that we're doing within our organization, not necessarily wanting to showcase that, but, just bringing a little bit into the real world, because I'm deep in the weeds in Web3, inclusion, global access, education. This is all very top of mind for us. And I appreciated the other speakers' comments from ranging from trust and transparency through the technology, as well as then the philosophies of it. So for us, we, you can see my see her background here. So I've been doing work in inclusion and specifically with women in emerging tech for about 15 years. And it's been interesting, lots of learning along the way to see, there's layers of inclusion and access that come when you kind of go deeper and deeper, and especially with the nuances in Web3 and it being such a global, a sphere, that I've found that there's nuances that we're tapping into that I think are hopefully going to be helpful, namely this See Her DAO. So what we're doing within our See Her DAO is we're uniting other women in Web3 communities. So this has been a big effort over the last year or so. Is after I assessed the landscape, I saw there was over about 100 active women in Web3 communities, including Disruptor DAO. And it was like, wow, okay, this is amazing. The last thing we want to do is sort of kind of, operate super independently, I felt. So I thought, well, I wonder if we could come together and unite as in the form of a DAO. So we've been onboarding women's communities over the last year, and I think there's close to 45, including Disruptor DAO with us. And the purpose of this is to continue to operate independently, right? We all have our unique focuses, global regions that many are connected to. We actually have every continent represented now, which is really cool. And so in terms of the topic around trust and access, which I think seems to be agency and access, that seems to be a key theme here. I think that we're starting to see where partners that we align with or other organizations are aligning with, namely blockchains and protocols, are wanting to bring their product and service into these regions, right? And into different areas. Some are looking for global access, but many are wanting to target regions like sub-regions within Africa and Latin America and Asia. And we're able to help facilitate these partnerships coming in to give them more agency, and the unique things that they're bringing to the table that we all know are things like cultural nuances. Right. Every region has its own way of shaping and use cases for wanting to introduce these technologies. And I think that we're seeing these next levels of integration globally happening across protocols, whereas initially it was kind of like, okay, let's introduce, this blockchain to to the world virtually through some activations. Now we're narrowing down into these unique regions, and I think it's going to be really exciting to see these niched activations happening, which are already starting, where they want to partner with local universities, create custom content around that. And I think that absolutely builds trust, with the adopters in those regions. And the blockchains often don't have representation there necessarily. So my organization, we're in the middle of this actually right now with One Blockchain, of helping facilitate the connection into that region, and also supporting I find this is a part of it, is supporting regions and having more access that they maybe haven't had necessarily yet in some ways, and making sure that those relationships are operated fairly and transparently.
Mm-hmm.
I am seeing some different experiences. I was a little surprised to see. I have to remain professional here, and it is top of mind, but this is my human self speaking, that I think there's more work that needs to be done. When we bring certain protocols, very large ones, into certain regions,
Mm-hmm.
there needs to be a strong focus on inclusion, and that includes financial, right? And noting that these regions have a lot of power and access. If they've been developing these relationships with local governments, with the local universities, they should be paid appropriately. So that's one thing I'm in the process of advocating for and learning myself. We're all learning here together, but I think that's kind of my point there on trust and access.
Mm. I'm so happy you brought up that piece about access. I know Paula's going to jump in about that piece. Thank you for that.
Well, I'll just add to it is I think everybody has access. I think everybody's going to, with technology today, it's open to everybody, and there's so many opportunities for everybody to participate, if you're about money, but it also gives people who may not have the money to go to college. This is an opportunity to learn a trade and actually to build in terms of their home, what they want to do in life. So technology today, as it evolves, as it's going on and on and on, is going to give people the chance to expand into a global region. It's the opportunity to increase in terms of their household income, increase if they're business owner, increase in terms of their revenue stream on a local, national, and global scale. And when you start bringing in other options in terms of what we're working with now in terms of cryptocurrency, that's going to give another layer to the opportunities that are out there for people to increase their wealth and build their wealth. So this technology is it's open to anybody who, as they say, has the hustle. And I've been reading a little bit about people, it's not about the smartest person in the world, it's the person who takes the opportunity, right? As long as you understand it, you hop on it right away, you don't wait. So if you are like that, and you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, you just have to be the one in the right place. And with that in mind, the world is your oyster.
Absolutely. Yes, indeed. Absolutely. So as we're thinking about, the opportunities that exist, the access that we can push forward with, and how this new technological landscape provides us with opportunities that have not existed for this generation, right? Like Kara, you just mentioned that our collective has representation from all continents, right? And we're able to come together and bridge gaps. So, as we are positioned, all of us are positioned to activate and move powerfully in this space, what is a risk or an unintended consequence of this rapid technological innovation world that leaders should be paying attention to more now? And I definitely want to point to George and bring you into the space, George, and then we'd like to hear from you again, Lynn, as well on this piece.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you with us.
Thank you. My apologies about the technical difficulty before, but glad to be a part of this conversation. Been some very good points that have been hit on. And in reference to, some of the unintended consequences coming from a policy perspective, with the Virginia Blockchain Council, where we do a lot on the policy side and advocating, and even on the community aspect with bringing people and community and educating them and just getting them in the conversation, but also being a builder in the space as well. Getting to see it from both sides. I think one of the things we don't want to forget with all of the technology, the advancements, which are amazing, as leaders, is, moving this innovation forward without really bringing the people with us. And a lot of that comes down to education, as it has been mentioned. So I think it's important to make sure that with the technological changes, with the advancements, we don't create a larger gap, because I think it's a gap now where people are hearing a lot about this technology, AI. Again, we do a lot with blockchain and surrounding technologies, and advocating for that, but that they're included in that, and that we don't leave people behind, right? And we're not advancing so fast without educating, because again, you create bigger challenges, I think, when that happens. And we're seeing some of that now, where I think people, they're hearing it, but instead of embracing it, because we will eventually have this technology more immersed into our lives. I got into the internet, early back in '99, and, people were saying they weren't going to put their credit cards online. And, obviously that changed greatly. And this will be the same, but I think the better we can do looking back in the past and maybe some mistakes we made, getting ahead of it now, like we're doing, having these conversations and just educating people and bringing them on, so that we don't create a wider gap, and creating good policies as well around that.
Yeah, thank you, George. And you touched on a piece, education, right? And that's what we're all about, and platforms and communities like GatherVerse and our collective and respective organizations. Education is so super important. We're all learning, and to build this in community with education at the forefront, I think it's been a game changer. I know for us, and also too, like you were saying, Kara, in that the industry could do more around educating more holistically. Definitely feel that for sure. Lynn, please jump in.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for this question, because I absolutely love it. And I really want to agree with George, because what he mentioned really aligns with what we do here at GatherVerse. And some of the standards of GatherVerse is education, safety, privacy, wellness, accessibility, and equality. So when we look at this kind of standards, this is where the human involvement comes into place. And I remember Paula talking about accessibility, and she said this is an error for that person who is willing to run with it. But to add to that, I also am aware there are people in this world, even the most basic needs like food and water, or the people who are right now sleeping somewhere they don't know. They have been displaced by war, a war that technology has really scaled. There are people who are really affected by climate issues. So when we look at other natural catastrophes or human formed catastrophes, and what is the role of technology when it comes to this? So my biggest risk is we have another side of the world that is much advanced, and we have another side of the world is either facing the consequences of technology, or is still in somewhere just in their own world where they're crying out, who is watching us? What can be done better? Can you please use this internet to help us? Can you please use this internet to create awareness of what is happening? So the biggest risk for me is just that gap, the human gap, but the biggest opportunity I see here is where people can tell their stories, and where they can be seen. Like what we are doing right now, people can be seen, people have expressions, people have ideas to share, and this is where they get to be seen. But overall, my biggest risk, the human gap. We're here to close it. Over to you.
Thank you for this. And I actually also too want to hear quickly from Matt on this piece, in your vantage point from being in the tokenization space. That's a huge word right now, and so as things are evolving rapidly, in the tokenization space, what are some things that might be missing, or what are some risks there as well, considering all of these pieces?
Yes, there is a major unintended consequence of access, which is that not all that is being accessed is good. And we have seen this in a high profile lawsuit based in Detroit, where an investment scheme that was put together under the guise of better transparency using tokenization actually turned out to be structurally unsound, very unethical, non-compliant in many capacities. But they used the regulatory exemptions, they used tokenization to bring in a lot of retail investors and folks from all over the world in order to invest in these opportunities and claim that they were building up the neighborhoods of Detroit. And actually, they were laundering the funds. So as we look at global access, we do also have to ensure that these systems are designed with trust, not just using trust as a label or as a marketing piece, but genuinely designed in trust. And there's a lot of difficult conversations that have to happen first, such as the frameworks, the standards, the enforcement, governance, regulatory considerations, in order to build this properly. And that's why Web3 is crawling along, because I, especially in terms of institutional adoption, there is some consideration there. They don't want things to go completely off the rails. And so in order for this to scale and actually be widely adopted and not consistently conflated with like crypto scams, we have to talk about what's right, what's wrong, how do we design this, what are the typical human errors, and how do we actually remedy that, not just cover it up in the meantime. What systems exist in the real world that we're building on top of that aren't even sound in the first place, right? There's a lot of layers to this, and that's the organic human elements. It's a complex world, and we're trying to figure out how to plug everything together. And then you also have bad actors that are making that not so easy to do. So I think that's just one consideration. As investment opportunities in the world open up, can we be conscientious about the unintended consequences of that and have some sort of guardrails and protect people? And there's we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Tokenizing investment structures to bypass investor protections, I don't know if that's a good idea. Those investor protections did emerge for a reason. They might be a little bit outdated and we can adjust those, but not everything that holds back retail from, let's say, private markets is simply socioeconomic gap. Some of it is because there's a history of risk and bad actors in different investments. So we have to be careful about how we approach it. A lot of systems might have corruption embedded in them, but not all. Some of them do have some solid elements or solid attributes to them.
Yeah. And you know what? All of that definitely plays, or it taps into our mental and social well-being, right? Like that example that you gave about what happened in Detroit, I can definitely imagine and know that it left the people of Detroit, those investors, feeling angst, walls up around there's the social and mental impact that situation involved. And I know several people who have experienced just nefarious things or had a bad experience with crypto, AI, Web3, all the above, and they're like, oh, I don't trust it, I don't want to do this ever again, right? So Dr. Eve, as we continue to unfold down this path of this digital world, as more life and business moves towards these digital environments, what are some of the social and mental and behavioral impacts, building off of what Matt just said, that we should be preparing for? I think you might. Oh, you're muted, Dr. Eve. There you go.
This you've covered so much, Matthew, that was important, and to all of you, and thank you, Angela. We're in a historic shift, right? For the first time, life is not just digital, right? It's an online, public, searchable, and permanent era, right? And that changes human behavior to begin with. So we have the distrust because there are these things that folks are not prepared for. There's issues with cybersecurity. Folks want to take leaps, but then things happen, and there we go. We end up connecting with all those past financial stressors and traumas, right? And so we stay, far distance. But then we also have this other issue too, right? What we're seeing is across healthcare systems, right? We're moving to AI diagnostics. Schools are integrating adaptive learning platforms. You have financial institutions using algorithmic underwritings. There's startups deploying smart contracts. DAOs are running tokenized governance. There is so much happening, in this digital space, and we're digitizing faster than many people can psychologically adapt, right? And that speed creates pressure, anxiety, right? And so when we think about at least four psychological realities, right, to take into account, I think of like cognitive saturation, right? There's when the brain receives more input than it can process meaningfully, there's dashboard alerts, there's governance votes, there's AI prompts, there's market swings, there's social media putting things out there, right? Now they're advertising just in every form and shape, right? So this is constant calling for what we call like hypervigilance, right? And hyperarousal. In plain language, it's mental exhaustion. So it's people resist change, sometimes not even because of access, but because it's not because and not because they're incapable, but because they're overwhelmed. So I think it's so important for us, and mind you, now let's not forget that as businesses digitalize, what's happening is that there are a lot of folks that are still trying to catch up, right? This includes the most disenfranchised communities, as was mentioned by one of our panelists, how important it is to be able to help them catch up. And so how do we prepare, right? We prepare by human support alongside automation, right? Which is some of the things that you were talking about, Matthew. It's like, how do we build that trust? How do we put in the forefront literacy, Web3 literacy, economic inclusion tools? How do we inform folks in a way that is safe and in layman's terms for some even, right? Because some of these terms are just going over everyone's heads, right? This whole concept is going over a lot of folks' heads, but it doesn't mean that they're not interested. It's how do we normalize when things happen? I mean, this is a permanent era. You put something out there, something goes wrong, and it is permanent. So we're constantly working on perfection, instead of quality. We're looking at performance on steroids. So how do we have some infrastructures put in place so we could address that, right? So how can we model when transparency, or be transparent when errors occur, right? I think I'm fascinated when there are business structures that will admit to there's a fault. We did a fault, and we're going to make changes in our policy. What does that mean? That means, okay, wait a minute. So there's possibilities to make mistakes, and I'm being told, I'm informed. That's a level of trust right there, right? So if we design systems that scale intelligence but ignore human nervous systems and trust, trust will fracture. If we design systems that honor both trust, it becomes the most valuable asset in this digital economy. So we have to think about how it impacts those that are running the scenes, and that are running these companies, those that are the recipients of. This is such a psychological, there's such a significant psychological component to all of this that's happening. And while we are having this conversation here, it goes silent. And it just goes silent in so many other places. And if we think about mental health, mental health, we can't even talk about mental health in some other countries. Imagine talking about the psychology of this era that we're in now. But it doesn't mean that we can't work it and address it. it's just, addressing some of the things that we just talked about here.
Yeah.
And what, and also what you were mentioning, Kara, it's like bringing people together, not working in autonomously in isolation. It's how do we still continue to do this in community and expand on what we're doing beyond this panel? How do we work on that together?
Yeah. And that brings us to kind of our closing thoughts and sentiments here. And, what do we see for the future, right? So, looking ahead for what's to come, 2026, 2027, 2030 and beyond. As, organizations are adopting Web3 AI, what are some important principles for building trust for customers? And I know, Dr. Eve, you just spoke a lot to that. And looking ahead, what gives you the most hope about emerging technologies and how, we can better serve humanity together? So, I'm going to start with Paula on this, and then George.
Well, as a marketer, I want to say that it would have to be everybody. It has to be the business community's responsibility in terms of when they're building, how they're communicating, and building the trust in the community. So it's about the narrative and how we tell stories and how we tell what is good for everyone in terms of technology, right? We build those gatekeepers, those guardrails into the technology, into the messaging, so that the communities will understand that, you can trust us in terms of what we're saying to you. But it's also in the terms of our community has to be educated enough to be able to do their own research. As they say in the whole cryptocurrency blockchain world, you do your own research to know what's right and what's wrong. So you have to, on both sides of the house, you have to really put the messaging out there and build that trust with the community, but also make sure the community will do the research and make sure that it's validated, right? So, and as a marketer, it's making sure that the messaging is correct before we put the messaging out there to everybody in terms of what the technology does, what is it for and what's the benefits and what's the why. So I'm excited about 2030. I think there's potential, there's opportunities for everybody. It's an opportunity right now to everybody has the opportunity to build their wealth.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, they've got to take advantage of it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And the part about messaging and research, right? Again, that's why I'm again so grateful for the GatherVerse community and these sorts of platforms, and us being able to share resources so that we can have a space to go for trusted advice, trusted resources, because you do got to do your research and kind of go down the rabbit hole in that piece. So thank you for that, Paula. George, what do you see 2030 and beyond, and what can we do?
Okay. Well, I think right now, if we do a really good job, and when I say we, meaning our legislators, our governments, and that's on a global scale. Obviously, I'm in America, but if we do a really good job of getting this legislation frameworks together, right? We've got a market structure bill that's on the table right now. We had the Genius Act here in the state that passed last summer for stable coins. But this market structure bill is very important, at least for the blockchain side of things and digital assets. I think AI frameworks will be coming as well. But I think it's important in order to open up the innovation fully, but also to protect constituents and consumers, but give a safe haven and a safe home for innovation and businesses to expand. And I think this goes both ways, because if we do a really good job now, by 2030, with education, as I mentioned before, and bringing people up, people can access this technology, these resources. We can start to bank the unbanked. We can have small businesses accessing the technology that a lot of multinational and large companies are accessing, but they can scale down to where it can be usable to make them more profitable. We can equip people. I see that happening, being able to bring this technology and assist people, almost like co-piloting AI with humans to bring them up so they can be more efficient and effective, so they're not just dislocated away from it and isolated from it. So I think if we do a really good job now, people amongst this panel and others a part of the GatherVerse and others beyond that. We do a really good job now. I think the future's amazing. I think it's going to look really good. Yes, we're going to have hurdles. We mentioned some of the social impacts or maybe the mental health issues. But if we learn from maybe how social media has impacted us as a society, and realizing that this will also have an impact with AI and having access 24/7 and surveillance and all of that stuff. But if we do a really good job, I think we can bring everybody up, and we should advance very well with this, and it could be a great benefit to mankind and make us more productive, effective, and hopefully profitable. So looking forward to the future. Thanks for the opportunity.
Indeed. Thanks, George. Kara, and then Matt, real quick, 2030 and beyond. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to continue on with this positivity and excitement. I feel exactly the same. I think adding one other layer here that I haven't brought up yet, but I think is an alignment with human needs and trust and agency, which is around collaboration. And we're seeing that fostered a lot more in Web3 with DAOs and with communities. And I think that I'm getting sometimes get a little visions, whether they're going to happen or not, but that we're going to see like a human shift where we've been definitely in these times of maybe more independence, kind of operating in separation, competition driven. That was maybe the last few hundred years. We're going to see this shift along with the technology that's even designed to be more peer-to-peer, right, and transparent. That we're going to actually have maybe like a toolkit, a stack that we work with as a globe, right? And that are kind of our general stack. And then our unique regional applications that are supportive of us, and potentially not to have so much more. It's like there's an infinite amount of things that we could build, but I'm excited to see where I think we're going to see, starting with those of us in the Web3 industry, when we're at an inflection point of a critical need time. Right now, I think we're all building and preparing and seeing a lot of energy coming towards, real world adoption, but we're not quite there yet. But picture when this comes into in the coming years, it could just be a few years where we see, wow, we're all going to need to get in this new system and new economy together. I mean, that's going to be massive. And I think we're all going to be very happy that we started building when we have. And when that comes, we are probably going to see on a meta level where we're going to need to kind of hone in what are the core applications that we need and come together as within our micro communities, educate each other on these layers that are nuanced for culture and language and such, and we're off to the races. So that's a quick summary, but I'm excited. Yes, not without hurdles, but experiences like this and leaders like yourself are very inspiring to me. So thank you.
Yes, and working collaboratively together. I love that. Matt, real quick, lasting words, 2030 and beyond. What do you see?
Yeah, absolutely. In the next few years, speaking on behalf of Gen Z, I want to see a lot more young leadership. There's a lot of people who might be a little bit distracted. I think that this is an opportunity to build something, to design policy, to shape a narrative. I want to see people sticking their necks out, taking some risks, thinking about technology, infrastructure, the world around us, redesigning the systems that can last 100, 200 years from now. This is year of the horse. This is a year for change, actually. And let's usher that in. Let's get after it. So some motivation there for everyone.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, thank you to our panelists, to the GatherVerse community and team. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. The future is not just about smart technology, as we've discussed today. It's about building systems that people understand, trust, and feel empowered to participate in. That is the work ahead of all of us. Thank you for being a part of the conversation and helping design a future rooted in human needs, emergence, and trust. Our Gather is well. Peace and love, everyone.
And what an outstanding roundtable discussion that we just had. Russell, day one is in the books. It's a wrap. What are your brief thoughts?
So much was shared today, and so much insight, and just so many thoughts that were shared overall, from autonomy to curiosity to trust to emerging technologies. I think there is one fundamental thing that everything seems to come back to, and that is obviously humanity and human values and the centricity of humanity as a whole. I think regardless of what technology you're using, and whether you trust it or not, like the point is still fundamentally that it comes back down to human and humanity and humans as individuals, and we have to put that first at the end of the day. And obviously trust is still fundamentally important, but it's humans is just the bottom line for all of this.
I agree. We think about in this concentric circle of trust and how persistent, thematic this word trust has been preserved in the tone of the various narratives that have been deployed and presented to us today. I find myself increasingly in the presence in the audience of GatherVerse becoming a student. I see a dichotomy that's emerging in the world, and I feel like it's being spilled into these discussions. I do see on one hand that there are those that candidly see optimism and flourishing when it comes to these emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence, whilst at the same time, on the other side of the spectrum, there are those that do see great cause and concern for the direction of where we're headed when it comes to these technologies. I wonder, Russell, if the GatherVerse community would like to have a great debate on this one day, on where they stand, optimism versus existential crisis. What are your brief takes on that, Russell?
Yeah, I think it'd be a very interesting discussion and debate. I think it definitely needs to happen. I see a growing especially on X, the platform, or Twitter. I see a growing on that side of things when it comes to people being against AI, and also we won't dive into the specific example, but also what Sam Altman said at the India Summit, for example. There's a whole thing kind of going on right now between AI for good and AI is bad, and I think it's very important to have those discussions and debates and be able to discuss about that and bringing that to the table from both sides to just be able to understand each other's side, or even just to be able to come to maybe potential mutual ground within the middle of, where is that middle ground? What is responsible AI? What is, what does human values and humanity for AI mean? All these discussions. I mean, even, trust as well. So I think it's important to have these discussions and debates for sure.
I do. I think it helps equip us to better prepare and to understand what's our inherent responsibility as innovators and non-innovators, and to understand that whether we find ourselves under the vestiges of innovating or not, we're all still subjected to this world that's being hyperscaled and in definite transitionary phase. Russell, thank you for taking the time to be able to join us. Our Gather was well.
Our Gather was well.
And in closing, for GatherVerse Summit 2026 Day 1, we want to thank each of you that are out there. There are so many, and we maxed out on our broadcast streams today. That was a first for us, and we're really thankful for all the different professional speakers that have really have taken time that we find to be so valuable and precious, a commodity that you'll never get back. And we thank you for spending the time that you shared with us. We want to thank the global audience community and those that are with us that we are familiar with, those we don't, those that are rebroadcasting in different offices and in places of work, or in your homes with your families or with your neighbors. We want to say thank you. We want to say greetings to each of you, and that if you ever have the desire to come and speak and express and share, we hope that you will find a place that matters for you within the GatherVerse ecosystem of the different assortment of summits that we have arriving this year. And there are many more great announcements that we'll be making soon. We're coming up next with our GatherVerse Day 2 and Day 3. We look forward to hearing from a wide assortment of different leaders from around the world, both women and men alike, that have so much to share with us at these free GatherVerse summits. We hope that you find value. We haven't wanted to charge anybody ever for these 40 plus global summits. We've never charged anyone, and we don't plan on charging anyone. We always want to make these as free, accessible, and affordable as we can. And we don't want to bring any hindrance or any burden to any of you. And so we show up when you show up. And if nobody ever shows up to GatherVerse, then it seems like as if the mission is fulfilled and it served its purpose. But I think it was indicative today of how many people have so much to say. And as a technologist who's also an educator, I really appreciate giving a better understanding of these technologies that I work with every day. And from your different shared lens perspective, I think it opens you up to be subjected to refinement. Refinement. I never want to be a technologist that knows it all. I never want to be in that space where I know everything and you can't tell me anything. I don't want to be that technologist. The cat's out the bag. One of the reasons I created GatherVerse was to do more listening than speaking. And as I've been taught, with 2 ears, 1 mouth, and we do more listening than speaking. It's an honor to be able to speak with you, but it's a greater privilege to be able to hear from you. And our gather was well.
Not to do what I have done. Spend your lives in sin. house of the rising sun. Well, I got one foot on the platform, the other foot on the train. Going back to New Orleans to wear that ball and chain. Well, there is a house in New Orleans they call the Rising Sun, and it's been the ruin of many a poor boy. And God, I know